Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our Hurricane Preparedness 101 webinar. My name is Brittany Dube, and I'm representing the Stamford Department of Health. I'm excited that so many of you are here to learn about how to prepare for hurricane season. As we know, Stamford, being a coastal town, gets impacted by hurricanes and tropical storms more than other cities might. And so hopefully you will use this information that you learned today to prepare for the next upcoming months. We'll start with remarks from 3 of our city officials and then move into the presentation. After the presentation, we'll answer any questions in the chat, so please feel free to submit questions throughout the session. So first up, I'd like to introduce Mayor Caroline Simmons. Mayor Simmons, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Brittany, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Hurricane Preparedness 101 webinar hosted jointly by the City of Stamford, CERT, and the Medical Reserve Corps. I also want to thank Chief Roach and Ted Jankowski for being here today and for your collaboration and making sure our city is as prepared as we can be, as well as John Perelstein from CERT. Thank you to the Department of Health, to all of our emergency management team, and to everyone who's on this call for collaborating on this important webinar to make sure that we're doing the best that we can to prepare our city for storm season and for a potential hurricane. As we head into hurricane season, it's important that we prepare and provide resources to residents ahead of a storm impacting our area, and that we all have a plan of action in place to keep everyone safe, and also to make sure those that are most vulnerable among us are safe in the event of a hurricane. Unfortunately, we've seen the damage that these storms can cause, and we know that due to climate change, these impacts of adverse weather effects will only continue to increase. And as a coastal community, we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to strengthen our infrastructure, to implement flood mitigation strategies that will reduce flooding impacts throughout our city. So throughout this webinar, you will learn important safety tips and resources that we will continue to share with Stamford residents to ensure you have the most up-to-date city and state information for emergency preparedness. So I want to say on behalf of the city, thank you for joining. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to my office at mayor's office at stanfordct.gov. And thank you for your participation and for doing your part to make sure that we're all prepared in the event of a hurricane hitting our city. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor Simmons. Up next, I'd like to introduce Director Ted Jankowski. He's the Director of Public Safety, Health, and Welfare.
Thank you very much, Brittany, and thank you, Mayor, for those comments. And one thing I have to say, and you hear this every year, this is definitely going to be an active season for hurricanes. Hopefully, not too many come our way, but I can tell you we're always preparing from the city's perspective to make sure that the residents are safe and also our workforce. And, we start preparing in May, and we track any type of event that might be coming our way. And usually we get some advance notice, and we have basically a 5-day plan. I speak to the National Weather Service, the meteorologists on duty on a routine basis. We have Chief Roach, him and I speak regarding weather, and we do track it to make sure that we can provide as much information to residents as possible. Because we all know when a hurricane strikes or bad weather strikes, we need to be prepared as a city, but we're also hoping that you as residents are also prepared. And throughout this entire presentation, you're going to get a lot of key information that we utilize, but stuff that you as residents also need to take into consideration. And it's very difficult if you look outside, there's some clouds and the sun is shining. It's very difficult to think that a hurricane could be coming our way 3 days later. But the reality is that Mother Nature does strike, and it changes very quickly. So we need to be prepared. But one thing I want to emphasize that Stamford residents, since I've been here for more than 10 years, everybody listens to the messaging that we get out there. So communication is so important. We try to get out as much communication, whether it's on our website, whether it's reverse 911 calls, whether it's our Everbridge emergency notification system, or even the social media. So again, communications is key. We will make sure that we can continue to get out as much information to residents. We will have press releases, and we've participated in different storms in the past. And the one that I'd like to bring to everybody's attention was Superstorm Sandy. And that was a situation that came our way. And And I have to give credit to our emergency management group. Everybody is on their game. We know Stamford better than anyone else. And based on the information that we receive, we prepare for the response, and even narrowing it down to what streets and what addresses could potentially experience flooding. So as we send out messages, we want you to be proactive. We want you to listen. And during this webinar, if you have any questions, by all, please ask, because we want to make sure that you as residents are as prepared as we are as a city. So Brittany, thank you very much again. And John, thanks for participating. And Chief Roach, thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Jankowski. And next I'm going to turn it over to Chief Trevor Roach, who is our Emergency Management Director and our Fire Chief as well.
Good afternoon, all. Over the last several years, hurricanes and tropical storms have occurred with greater frequency and intensity than ever before, causing tremendous destruction across the United States. During this time, this is the beginning of our hurricane season. We must recommit to improving Stamford's resilience to hurricanes. Last year, without a direct hit from a hurricane, 2 hurricanes did substantial damage in our area. Hurricane Ida made landfall in Louisiana, moved northeast, and caused severe weather and severe flooding in the city of Stamford. Hurricane Henri, the first hurricane to hit the Northeast in 30 years, killed many people and caused billions of dollars in damage. These hurricanes devastated infrastructures, economies, and communities in their path. The government can't alone address hurricanes and extreme weather resilience alone. Every individual and family in Stamford is threatened by these storms and has an important role to play. Staying informed, making sure your insurance policies are up to date. We found that last year, many people didn't understand flood insurance. Please make sure your flood insurance is up to date. Having an emergency kit with plenty of water, a gallon a day for everybody, and a plan in place so your whole family understands. They're all very important preparation steps. We're in this together. It's not the city by itself, it's all of us together. So Brittany, please take it away.
Thank you, Chief Roach. And now I would like to introduce John Perelstein, who is one of the co-leads of our Stamford Citizen Emergency Response Team, or Stamford CERT, and he'll be presenting on hurricane preparedness.
Thank you. I presume you want me to share my screen now. And whoops, full screen. There we go. How's that? Are you seeing it, Brittany?
Yes, all set.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Before we start, I want to say 2 things, aside from thank you for coming. The first one is, in some of the slides here, you'll see pictures of specific products. We are not endorsing, we are neither endorsing nor not endorsing any specific product shown, just picked up pictures for illustration purposes. All of the photos of specific products are at least 5 years old, which means those products are not available in the marketplace anyway. Secondly, on a number of the slides, we're going to be talking about things you should consider buying. Obviously, this is not the most opportune time to be suggesting people buying things, but some of the stuff is cheap. Some of the stuff is things you might have, and you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to jump in and wildly spend thousands of dollars. You can start building up your capabilities. So let's get started. The first thing that I just want to mention is there is a problem more in this country than anywhere else where people are less and less inclined to listen to the weather forecasters. There are various reasons for that, not the least of which is something that is actually being called Jim Cantore effect. If you know who he is, he's a weatherman on the Weather Channel, and they send him out to every weather event that happens. Most of them turn out to be busts, and it's gotten to the point where people just say, "Oh, if Jim Cantore is covering it, then it must be a nothing. It's going to wind up being a nothing burger." The media in general overhypes weather events. You know, it used to be 20 years ago, hey, this is New England. We're going to have 3 inches of snow. Big deal. Now it's stay tuned for the massive snowstorm forecast. So people stop listening. Don't stop listening. You really should listen, pay attention, because those forecasts are more accurate than you think they are. Like yesterday, we were supposed to have had heavy rains and winds. We didn't get that. They were about 20 miles south of us. The South Shore of Long Island got hit. The Jersey coast got hit. That's only 20 miles away. So they were off by about 20 miles in their forecast. The next time they could be off by 20 miles towards us. So pay attention, please pay attention to the weather. These days, there are a number of very interesting weather sites on the web. Weather Bug, that's a good one on your phone. Lightning Maps, which shows real-time lightning within 5 seconds of a lightning bolt actually hitting. Weather Underground is a good site. The National Hurricane Center is very good for hurricanes. The Weather Channel, AccuWeather. And interestingly, one of the best of the forecasters is a guy on Facebook who calls himself Tri-State Weather. He's not a professional weatherman, but he's often more correct, more accurate than the professional weather people are. He called Henri last year. He called it exactly right. He called, I think it was Ida, that heavy rainstorm. So it's interesting if you want to spend a couple of bucks on Patreon to support him. Most of these sites have apps for iPhone and Android, very useful for keeping current. Things to watch out for in a hurricane: wind. Wind is probably the biggest danger in this area because it's going to uproot trees, it's going to uproot power poles. Falling trees, we've all seen the falling trees, we've all seen the fallen power poles, we've all lost power for some period of time because of fallen trees and power poles. If you've got heavy growth of trees around your house, you may want to prune it back. Something to consider, because if the tree is not close to your house, less likely to fall on your house. By the way, if you've got tree branches hitting the roof of your house, if they're laying on the roof of your house, those branches are probably doing damage to the roofing of your house. It's amazing how these seemingly lightweight branches can really tear up the roofing tiles. And then what happens when a storm comes along, those roofing tiles will lift or they'll just break, and you're going to wind up with water in your house. So consider doing some pruning. One of the other big dangers is flash floods. I think you all know where that picture was taken. Flash floods can occur in minutes, not hours. I mean, literally within about a 5-minute period. Keep in mind that 6 inches of fast-moving water will knock you off your feet. So if there's water flowing down Washington Boulevard, for example, it may not look like it's flowing. It may look, the old line, still waters run deep. That's not quite what happens. It looks like they're still, you wade out into it, and the next thing you know, you're knocked right off your feet. 1 foot of fast moving water can float away a car. Figure 2 feet for a big SUV. And of course, it's easy to get caught under low overpasses, especially the Metro North and I-95 overpasses. Keep in mind that, if your engine gets flooded, if you drive into a puddle that deep, as you're seeing in this picture, you're talking about easily $1,500 plus in repair bills for your engine. So stay out of the puddles. You don't know how deep they are. Lightning is another potential danger. We don't usually get hit, but if your house gets hit, it can do this kind of damage. A couple of houses up from me got hit about 5 years ago. It took them about a year to get everything put back together in the house, and it didn't look much different than that. Don't go out in lightning. You've all heard that before. Lightning bolt cannon will kill you. Yes, lightning prefers taller objects, but it'll take anything it can get. And lightning can hit as much as 10 miles from an actual thunderstorm. So if you're watching the weather radar and it's showing that the lightning storm is over in Greenwich, that's less than 10 miles. We could get hit very easily. Please be careful, lightning. And that's true of any lightning, any storm. So where do you get information? There is the web, of course. A lot of the good information is there. Radio and TV have historically been the best places, but Not so much these days. FM is not very useful because most of the FM stations we get originate from outside this area. They're big corporate networks, and those people have their money supplies coming in for ads. They do not like to interrupt their programming to make local announcements. So you can listen. There are major radio stations in this area. You can listen for a whole day while the hurricane is going on. You won't hear any mention of it. So seriously, not as useful. AM radio may be more useful because you've got more local channels, more local stations, and especially you've got the news radio stations. The reverse 911 is a very good source. The Be Prepared Stamford, you can register from there and get information that is up to the minute from, or alerts that are up to the minute from emergency management. There's a good FEMA app, a number of good FEMA apps, a number of good Red Cross apps for the phones. There is the old NOAA weather radio, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. They have radio stations that broadcast weather on a continuous cycle. They're usually off the regular AM and FM bands, but you can, for not a lot of money, you can buy a radio that receives them. Red Cross and a number of others sell hand crank radios like you see here. That's got a little hand crank. It's battery operated. It's got a little solar panel, and it's also got a hand crank. So if the battery runs out, you run that hand crank, and you'll still be able to hear your radio, and you'll still be able to get the NOAA alerts. And a lot of these hand crank radios now will also charge your cell phone. So it's not a bad idea to have one of these. It doesn't have to be the Red Cross. There are lots of them available. The first question, of course, is, do I stay or do I go? If your area is if they're recommending evacuation in your area, do you stay or not? If evacuation is recommended, you are not going to be able to save or protect your house. It's just not going to happen. You're just going to be in the house and potentially a danger. This is a picture from Hurricane Ike in 2008. And as it says, there are 27 homes in this photo. There were people who stayed in some of those houses. They never did find some of the bodies. People will always ask, why is it that one house is standing? And there were all sorts of stories over the years about satanic rituals and whatever. But the truth is, the people who built that house built it up on piles. Just like a pier. And you can't see it very well from this photo, but that house sits about 14 inches above ground. So as the waters came across and flooded the area, they just ran under the house, just like they would run under a pier, and the house remained standing. So seriously, if there's a mandatory or recommended evacuation, go. You're not going to be able to protect your home. Down in the Outer Banks, Carolina, police will come along and take DNA samples from those people who are staying so they can identify the bodies later. If you're going to shelter in place, whether there's an evacuation or not, if you're going to shelter in place, you have to be prepared for the long haul, which means no electricity, food and water distribution are going to be difficult. You have got to be prepared to stay without food, outside food or water for 7 to 10 days. If you go, you're going to a shelter. Shelters are typically in high school gyms. Our primary shelter is a Red Cross shelter at Stamford High. You're going to be in a public area with very little privacy. Excuse me. Having some allergies today. If you're going, you have to bring your medications, especially anything that's life important. Bring some clothes, bring some toiletries, bring special toys for kids. If you have kids, bring things that will keep the kids occupied. Bring books, whatever. But this is the living conditions you're going to be in. The shelters will generally provide pillows and bedding, but you may feel a lot more comfortable bringing your own pillows and your own bedding. And of course, your own towels and washcloths. Don't forget flip-flops. And there may not be a facility to lock up valuables. You may have to lock them in your car. You may want to leave them at home if you've got a safe place to leave them at home. The valuables is a serious question, what to do with them. And you'll see this again, stay off the social media, stranger danger. If you're posting on Facebook that you're in the shelter, you have just announced to the world, my home is unoccupied and it's there to be robbed. Or my kids are in the shelter, now somebody knows where your kids are. Please stay off the social media. If you're going to evacuate, don't forget your pets. This is an example of the kind of conditions your pets will be living in, but they will be living. Shelters in Connecticut will generally take common household pets. They won't take livestock. They won't take predators. They won't take especially poisonous or venomous animals. The pets will be in separate rooms. For example, down in the auto shop at Stamford High, you have to take care of your pet, including providing food, cleaning the cage, walking them, whatever. And by the way, the shelters will have some cages for your pets, but not many. So you should have cages, a cage or cages for your pets, and bring them with you, bring the cages with you if you have to evacuate. Because otherwise they may have to turn you away if they don't have the cages. Okay, if you're going to stay, water, a gallon per person per day. That's the basic limit. That includes washing, but that's really what you should have. Food for at least 3 days, because it's going to be at least 3 days before somebody can get food to you or you can get out to get food, or maybe at least 3 days. Really, that's a bare minimum. You should plan for 7 to 10 days and make sure it's food that you're going to eat. For example, you can buy what they call the protein biscuits, which are the things they feed to people in famine. You can buy a stock of those, but if you have to eat those for 5 or 8 days, are you going to eat them? Will people really eat them? Freeze-dried camping foods are good. We'll talk about them a little bit more. Energy bars, same kind of thing. They get boring pretty quickly. You can buy MREs, the same stuff the military eats. You can buy them from Amazon and other camping sources. Don't forget to have a manual can opener. If you're going to have anything that's canned, have a manual can opener. There are also the emergency ration companies. They all call themselves Patriot this, Patriot that. I'm not quite sure why, but it's freeze-dried foods that you can then just pour in some boiling water, mix it up, and you have stews, eggs, things like that. And they're supposed to be pretty good, and the pricing is not bad. I'm not saying it's something you want to spend, but the pricing is actually not bad on these, and they reportedly have long shelf lives, and they really do have the long shelf lives. If you're going to be sheltering in place, you may not have power to be able to cook. You probably won't have grid. If you don't have electricity, your stove may not work, because most stoves these days have electric igniters. And if the electric igniter is not working, then the stove won't provide gas. You can't even start it with a match. It just won't provide gas, so you won't be able to use it. There's all sorts of camping stuff. If any of you have gone camping, you recognize the classic Coleman stove. There are lots of interesting propane-based little propane cooking pots, like the one in the lower right that says jet boil on it. They work off of little propane tanks. It's nice to have lightweight pots and pans because they heat up faster, but again, that's spending a lot more money. There are other places you could use your money. You may want water sterilization and filtering kits. That's usually not been a problem in Stamford. If you're up in North Stamford, if you're using well water, you may have more of a problem where you need filtering and purification. And these things you can get mostly at the camping and outdoor companies like Camp Moore, REI, etc. There are also other disaster prep stores, mostly online. They're good sources. You just do your comparisons, price shopping comparisons. One thing to be careful about is that a lot of these emergency ration foods, a lot of the camping foods, a lot of the canned foods are high in sodium. If you have any sort of a medical condition where you have to worry about hypertension or sodium, be careful. You got to plan the stuff out more carefully than you might otherwise have to plan out. More smaller packages are better than a few larger packages, because if you open up a large package, you've now opened it, and if it's things like crackers, they're going to get moldy, or at least they're going to get damp faster because they've been opened. So don't go get the Costco super giant size. Get some smaller stuff. And don't forget food and other supplies for your pets, because if you've got your pets at home, you're going to need to take care of them. Or if you got your pets at the shelter, you're going to need to take care of them. So you need to have a supply of food you can bring with you to the shelter, or feed your pets at home. If you can, get some clothing and toiletries in waterproof storage. You can get waterproof storage bins at any hardware store. Again, you can get them at the camping stores. Even if you put them in freezer bags and close the freezer bags carefully. Something that will keep the water out. Certainly, you got to keep the water out of the pills, otherwise the pills just become a mess of nothing. But you want some clean clothes to be able to change into, clothes that are not wet, sopping and wet. For us these days, we probably want computer backups. You may want to even take a computer backup with you if you're going to the shelter in case your house is damaged. Because we've got copies of, we've got our bank statements on our computers, we've got our we've got our mortgage statements, we've got our the actual legal documents for the houses on our computers. So consider a backup that you can take with you. They're pretty inexpensive. You probably ought to have one anyway. You should be backing up what you have on your computer. And there are internet backup services that you can use where you're backing up your stuff to the cloud, and the cloud's not going to get flooded out. You should also make sure you have a supply of batteries, chargers, cables, adapters for your computers, for everything in your house. Anything that takes batteries, make sure you have a supply of those. Communications plans for people you live with and for people you don't live with. For example, how are you going to communicate with your children who live with you, or the other adults that live with you? Most of these weather events that we're talking about are events that don't happen suddenly. You've got a day or two of warning that something is going to happen, usually more than a day or two of warning. So you can make a plan. You'll probably be together when the event hits. We don't get a lot of tornadoes in this area. If we did, then it's a good idea to have radios, give your kids radios so they can get in touch with you. Probably don't really need it, but something to consider. These small FRS radios, you can get them in blister packs, so 3 for $69. They're short range. They're not going to talk down in New York City. They'll talk about a mile, maybe a mile and a half in this area, but at least you can get in touch with your kids. Have a plan for communications with your local friends and relatives. And this one gets tricky because the cell towers are often down during the storm and for a couple of days after the storm, except they're not down. They're just overloaded for the most part. In some of the biggest storms we've had in this country in the last 10 years, fewer than 10% of the cell towers have gone down. But what happens is they're overloaded because everybody's on the phone talking to each other. Oh, did you see that storm? Yes, I went through the storm. I saw the storm. Don't be one of those people. Don't overload the cell towers. You can wait and talk about it later. And by the way, when the cell towers when you can't get calls through, you may be able to get text messages through, because the text messages require far less of the cell tower's capacity than the call does. So there may be enough capacity to get a text message through. You also want a communications plan for distant friends and relatives. Everybody's going to be calling you, and everybody's going to be expecting you to call them. And that's going to be using up your cell phone battery. If the grid is down, if you don't have electricity in your house, you're going to wear down the battery in your cell phone pretty quickly. Once you do that, you don't have the cell phone to be able to make calls in an emergency. So something happens, if somebody has a medical condition, if a fire starts, anything like that, and your cell phone is dead because you've been talking to everybody. One of the more common things that people do these days is they designate somebody, one person out of the area as the contact. They call that contact once a day, give them an update, and then everybody else is supposed to call your contact. So for example, if you've got 4 adult kids, none of whom live at home, or for those that don't live at home, designate one of those kids as the contact. Everybody else, the other kids, the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents, the whatever, have them call that one kid to get the information rather than calling you directly. And now another thing that's come up in the past couple of years is group text message. You can have a group text message for all those people where you send them a text message once a day that says, we're okay, whatever. Save the battery on your cell phone for important things. You can limit the cell phone usage to conserve the battery. One of the things that uses up the battery in your cell phone the most is when you have the data service on and there's no cell phone data service. So for example, if a cell phone tower is out and you've got a 5G or 4G phone, that phone is going to wear down its battery very quickly trying to contact the internet service on the cell tower. Turn off that service. You can turn it off. You should know how to do that anyway. Turn that off. You will be amazed at how much longer the battery will last. And maybe even turn off your phone for periods of time. If you've got a communications plan, then you don't have to have it turned on all the time to take calls from people. You've updated them, turn it off, you're saving the battery. There are external batteries for cell phones that you can buy. There's a picture of one here on the lower right. They're now at the point where you can get one that'll charge your battery for, keep recharging it for a week or 10 days, and they run about $35-40. Especially if you're going to be going someplace, if you're the kind of person, not the kind of person, if you're somebody who works in Manhattan and you go to Manhattan every day, you may want to carry one of those with you anyway, just to have a backup in case. So you can buy the battery. Your car will charge up your phone. And remember, I said those crank radios with the built-in cell chargers. You crank for 5 minutes and you get 20 or 30 minutes worth of battery life. And that can be a major improvement in your life as you go. And again, don't post on social media, because anything you post on social media can be used by strangers to find vulnerabilities that they can use for robbery or whatever. If you do have damage, if a window is broken or you get some leakage, there are things you can do relatively inexpensive to limit the damage. Up here, we don't usually put plywood over the windows because we don't get those kinds of winds. Down south, they do, but you should consider it. You're having sheets of plywood that you can nail in over the windows. A small pump. It doesn't have to be a very big pump. It can be a hand-operated pump, something to pump out the basement. The quicker you get water out of your basement, the better you are. Not just in terms of the things like your boiler, your furnace, air conditioning unit, whatever, but mold. And mold is a really big problem once you get water inside the house. So consider having a small pump. You can get plastic sheeting. It's cheap at the hardware stores. Put it over broken windows. With a staple gun, you can put it over a broken window pretty quickly, and that will help keep the rain out of the house. You've all seen people who've had some sort of roof damage from whatever source, and they've got a big tarp over the house. If you can do that, if you have a ladder, if you're capable, you can get these big waterproof tarps. They're cheap. Sorry about that. Apparently somebody wants to give me a car warranty. You can get these big waterproof tarps and ropes and put them up if you're capable of doing that. Don't try climbing up a ladder if you're not capable, please. Inside the house, you can get tarps. Again, these things are typically cheap. They're $5, $10 to put over furniture if there's a leak inside the house. So if there's a leak in the living room, try to move as much of the furniture together and then throw a tarp over it and salvage your furniture that way. If you have a leak if you have a leak that's starting to spread in the ceiling of a room, and you'll see the water spot starting to spread. If you can, get up on a ladder and drill or cut a hole that channels the water, so the water will come down into, let's say, a bucket. If you have presumably you'll have a bucket or something that'll keep the water from spreading and taking out the whole ceiling. If you have to replace a 1-foot section of ceiling, that is a hell of a lot less expensive and a lot less disruptive than if you have to replace the entire ceiling in a room. So consider that. And just have some basic things, basic tools, know how to work some basic tools like a hammer and nails, some screwdrivers, maybe a saw, maybe a socket set. Just have those around because you can make small minor repairs that can make a dramatic difference in how much damage gets done and how livable or not livable your house is. Lighting. If the power is out, open flame candles are dangerous. You know, we all have those candles. We all have those nice decorative candles we bought over the years. Open flame candles are dangerous. People, kids, pets, knock them down and then fires start. So if you want to use candles, at least consider these, they call them candle lanterns. There's a picture there in the middle, that thing that says UCO, UCO. That's a candle lantern. The candle is inside that metal and glass lantern. If it gets knocked over, it's not going to set a fire. And the old hurricane lanterns that you may have seen if you ever watched old movies set on ships. There are now lots and lots of LED lights. We all know about LED lights. We all know how these little flashlights put out a tremendous amount of light with just a little battery. There are LED lights you can buy. You can hook them up to a small battery. It doesn't have to be a big car battery. You can get much smaller 12-volt batteries. You can hook up those lights and you can have enough light to function at night. It's not going to be reading level brightness, but it's going to be enough light that you can sit there, you can move around, you can go to the bathroom, you can go up to bed without tripping over things. And the lights are cheap and you can get a small battery. And it's much safer than trying to deal with open flames. If you really want to go for it, you can get solar panels to recharge these batteries. Solar panels are still somewhat expensive. Prices are coming down, but they are still somewhat expensive. Keep in mind that recharging batteries with a solar panel means you have to get a lot of sunlight. This is not the kind of thing that you can put out in a shaded backyard. You've got to get some real good direct sunlight on these solar panels. And it could be 5 to 8 hours of sunlight to really charge up a battery. A lot of us don't get 5 to 8 hours of sunlight because of all of our trees. So just keep that in mind. And again, of course, bins, waterproof bins, bins on wheels, latched bins so that they don't pop open. Wheels are always our friend. And don't forget about a first aid kit, emergency kit, basic stuff, hot and cold compresses, bandages, things like that. Try to take a course, learn how to use them so that if you're trying to shelter at home, if somebody gets injured, hopefully you can do some basic repair work, or that you don't have to try to get out in the middle of the storm and get to a doctor or a hospital. And yes, the stuff has to be current. Most of these things have use by dates, and they're serious. If you're not going by the use by date, a lot of these things won't work. These compresses, for example, won't work. So keep that in mind. One of the more important things for keeping your home livable and for after the storm is to be able to shut off the water, the gas, and the electricity. If nothing else, because if you get flooding in your basement, you don't want the electricity on. Because then if you go wandering down in the basement, you can in fact get electrocuted. If water gets into the gas pipes, that can ruin your appliances. So if water gets into the gas pipes, you can ruin the stove that's up on the kitchen, which is not in the flooded area. If this rainwater gets into your water system, your pipes inside the house, it's bringing contaminants that you really don't want to be drinking or bathing in. So learn how to shut these things off. You should all have fuse boxes or circuit breakers. If you have gas, there's usually something. There's supposed to be a fixture outside or where the gas enters the house where you can shut off the gas, and the same thing with the water. Learn how to do it. Standard pliers, wrenches will do a fine job. You don't have to buy anything special to be able to do that kind of thing. After the storm, take lots and lots of photos. Photos outside of any damage that's outside, because that will help the city get reimbursement from FEMA. And the more money we get from FEMA, the less money the city has to pony up itself. And obviously that's to our benefit. Any pictures of any damage. Usually your cell phones, most digital cameras will actually put the latitude and longitude on directly in the file. So when you send it in, they can pull that out and know exactly where the damage is. If not, or even if you do that, send it in with a little description of where the damage was. This particular photo was taken up in North Stamford. Of course, get photos of inside the house, because you're going to need that with the insurance company. Once the storm is gone, if there's been serious breach in the house, like you see in this lower picture here, first of all, make sure the area is declared safe by public safety, because if there are standing puddles and there are electric lines down that are going through those puddles, those electric lines can come alive when you least expect it. So you see the puddle, you see the line is down, nothing is happening. You start wading through the puddle, and that happens to be when the electric company is trying to power up the line. Wait until it's declared safe. Remember, you don't know how deep a puddle is. For example, the road underneath the puddle could be washed out, and it might not be a 6-inch puddle. It might be a 6-foot puddle. And you step into it, can you swim? If you want to go into your house and the house is flooded, make sure the electricity is off. If you don't know how to do that, if you can't do that, get somebody to come in who knows what they're doing to check to make sure the electricity is off in the house, because you don't want to go wading through a flooded basement. If there's electricity coming into the house, you can get electrocuted. People do every year, including every year one or two people in Connecticut, not even necessarily from storms, just pipe burst. They go wandering down to the basement. Next thing you know, they're electrocuted. Check for gas leaks. The gas that's used, if you have gas in the house, for your furnace and whatever, that gas is lighter than air. It should float away, but inside the house, the gas can get caught in a pocket. It has no place to go. When that happens, you get a big pocket of the gas. You're wandering down in your basement. You walk into that pocket of gas, you may not be able to breathe. So check for gas leaks. Remember, the gas that's used inside the houses always has a smell, that rotten egg smell to it. Eversource did a mailing in June, earlier this month. Most of you, all of you who are on this call probably should have gotten that mailing. And they had some good basic information in there, so I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. Stay out, I've said, stay out of the flooded basements. Any loose wires should be considered live and dangerous. You can see the top picture, there are loose wires dangling in the water. Even if your gas appliances don't look like they're flood damage, they may be flood damaged because the water may cause corrosion damage. So you start it up and a pipe bursts and start spraying the area with flammable gas. Get somebody who's licensed to inspect the gas-powered appliances. Get somebody who's licensed to inspect anything that's down there to make sure that your stuff is working properly and working safely. Oops. Floodwater can damage the structural framework of your home and actually move or shift a house from its foundation. Once the house has been shifted or the structural framework has been damaged, that house is unsafe and may collapse on you. It can literally just collapse on you. So if there's any sign that the house is shifted on its foundation or that the foundation is damaged or the outer walls are damaged, get somebody to look at it before you start trying to go in that house. And we've said the flooding can cause damage to natural gas lines. By the way, the floodwaters, if they're strong enough and they move an appliance, that appliance, the lines feeding that appliance can be compromised. So if my stove is moved 6 inches over, the pipe that feeds gas into that stove may be damaged, which means you could have gas pouring out of that pipe. Again, get somebody who knows what they're doing to review it. And we've already talked about wiring. If anything's been underwater, they're a concern. So make sure you got all the electricity off. A big problem if you flooded is mold. You want to get the water out as soon as you can, pumps, buckets, whatever. Just get started. You know, it may look like it's going to take forever to get rid of the water, and it may, but get started, get the water out. The faster you get the water out, the better. As you're getting the water out, try to get some fans operational, at least open windows, get the moisture out of the house. Mold is a bad thing, and it costs a fortune to remediate, and it's generally not covered by homeowners insurance. Some of you or many of you may consider getting generators for power. And you know what I'm going to say here applies for after a nor'easter or an ice storm or snowstorm or any other kind of storm if power is out. This is not just after a hurricane. Figure you want to have enough power for 3 to 7 days if you're going to get a generator. If you're going to get one of these small generators, focus on essentials. You're not going to live like you normally do. You may not be able to power the air conditioner. You may not be able to power the 50-inch, seems like 50 foot, the 50-inch television, you know, the home entertainment center. That's not a must-have. The must-haves are things like your furnace, especially in winter, to be able to get enough heat in the house to keep the pipes from freezing. You don't have to be able to walk around in your t-shirt and shorts in the middle of winter, but you have to have enough heat in the house to keep the pipes from bursting. Maybe 55. Yes, you'll be wearing lots of heavy clothes, but your pipes won't burst. You want the hot water heater for the shower and sink because you want to be able to wash. Maybe not have it on constantly, but maybe once a day you want to be able to wash up with some hot water. If you have a sump pump, you need that because without a sump pump, the water is going to back up into your basement and you're going to lose the basement. Even if the house didn't flood, a sump pump, if you have a sump pump, if you have a wet basement, you need that sump pump. If you're on well water, you need a pump to be able to feed you water. If you've got a septic system, you need something called a septic tank lift pump. If that is not running when you're using the bathroom, it's all going to back up into your bathroom and into your house. You don't want that to happen. You probably want to keep the refrigerator running. You want a few lights at night. You want a radio, cell phone charger. You may even want the computer, computer or internet. If you or someone in your house has a medical condition that requires electrical equipment, consult a licensed electrician. Don't just go by this presentation. Now, there are the big whole house generators, like Generac is the big name of those things. They're big generators that will power the whole house as if nothing happened. Those are thousands of dollars to put in. If you can afford it and want to put it in, that's great. And by all means, please do. What I'm going to be talking about here is the small portable generators that a lot of people buy. And we'll just go on those. So on those generators, there's all sorts of little tricks with them. The manufacturers specify what they call a startup power versus continuous power versus half load. So startup is the maximum power it can put out for a minute or two. If, example here was a generator that I picked from Amazon. They said it was 6875 watts, 6,875 watts of surge power. That's startup. That's a minute or two. So if you think you're going to be trying to run 6,875 watts of stuff on a continuing basis, that generator is nowhere near the right size for you. It will literally melt, if not catch fire, if you try to do that for more than a minute or two. This is for things like refrigerators, hot water pumps, any kind of pump, mechanical pump kinds of things. When they first start up, they have a surge of power that lasts for a half a minute or a minute, and then they settle down. And that's why they have these things. They distinguish between the surge and the continuous. So continuous, as the name implies, is the maximum for more than a minute or two. And then when they tell you how much gasoline the generator is going to take, almost every manufacturer tells you at half load, 50% load. So looking at this was an actual offering on Amazon. In fact, the same generator was available from Home Depot. It was 6,875 watts of surge, but only 5,500 watts of running. And then it says in nice big letters, 7.2 gallon tank runs up to 10 hours at 50% load. So that means in this generator, you're going to use 7.2 gallons of gasoline every 10 hours to only get out 2,750 watts. Now the box in big letter, in big number says 6875. And it's only little tiny letters where it says, oh yeah, 7.2 gallons for only 2,750 watts. This is all the manufacturers do that. Be careful, because if you're figuring out what you need, be careful what the generator rating is. And let's look at what that means. If it's it was 7.2 gallon tank at 50% load for 10 hours, that means for one day, you're going to need 7 cans of gasoline. 7 of these 2.5 gallon cans of gasoline. Do you think that in the day after a hurricane, you're going to be able to get 7 cans of gasoline? In 3 days, it's 21 cans. Most of us would not be able to do that, unless we're lucky and the storm didn't affect us to begin with, because the gas stations will be closed for a couple of days. You're just not going to be able to get that much gas. So what you want to do is reduce your utilization, reduce your power utilization. This is what I said. You can't live like you normally do. So let's look at some things we can do. Well, If we limit ourselves to the refrigerator, a couple of light bulbs, maybe a kitchen appliance once in a while, a sump pump and a furnace, we can get away with less power. We can get away with that. Sorry, we can get away with that amount of power with 3,300 watts. That's about the half load, slightly above the half load. So we're talking about 7 cans of gas for the day. That's for a $650 to $800 generator, weighs about 193 pounds. And so again, wheels are our friends. If you limit how long things are on, for example, a decent refrigerator in decent shape should be able to go for 4 or 5 hours without being run. So you run it 1 hour out of every 4, it will keep your food cold. Okay, your furnace, you should be able to get away with running your furnace maybe 1 hour out of every 4 or 1 hour out of every 6. Typically, you don't have to run your sump pump continually. You have to run it maybe 1 hour out of every 2 or 1 hour out of every 4. So by controlling when things are on and limiting them, you don't have to run your generator at 3,000 watts. You can get away with 1,300 watts. And in fact, you can often get away with turning your generator off for a couple of hours every day, like 2 hours out of every 4, you can have your generator turned off. Now you're down to using 3 cans of gas a day, which is somewhat more realistic. You're talking about a smaller generator, a lighter generator, and a less expensive generator. So keep that in mind. There are all sorts of charts available on the internet. Honda has a very good chart, as does Eastern Tool and Equipment, showing what typical house appliances take. And you can figure out what you're going to need. Sit there, do the calculation, figure out what you're going to need in terms of your furnace, in terms of if you're going to run your microwave at all, if you're going to run your electric range, whatever, and figure out what you really need. Try to minimize the electric load. Try to organize things so that you have only 1 or 2 things on at any given time. You can wind up with a pretty small generator that keeps you going. Again, maybe you're not going to run your 50-inch or 75-inch plasma TV, but you'll be safe. You'll be reasonably warm. Your house will be protected. Oops, sorry. Okay. How do you hook up a generator? The thing that most people think of is what's called backfeeding. They simply take the output of the generator and they plug it into a wall outlet. Please do not do that, because your wall outlet, the room wiring, they're just plugging it into the wall outlet in one of the rooms. The wiring in that room probably cannot take the generator's output. And you can start a fire. Hopefully your circuit breaker will pop, or your fuse will go, but not always. So you can wind up with a tremendous amount of heat building up in the wall. The wall catches fire, the rest of the house catches fire. And also, when you do that, you're feeding your power back out into the grid. So a lineman working on the lines near you could wind up getting electrocuted because you're running a generator that you're backfeeding into your house. Please don't backfeed into your house. If you're going to do that thing, if you're going to run a generator, either run some heavy duty extension cords, and I mean heavy duty, the big thick orange extension cords, or get what's known as a transfer switch. A transfer switch lets you selectively isolate some of the circuits in your house. You plug the output of the generator into the transfer switch. It just goes into those particular circuits. and provides power just to those particular circuits, to no other circuits in the house. It's a bit expensive. You're talking about $300 or $400, maybe $500 for the transfer switch, and you got to get an electrician. It's going to be expensive, but please don't backfeed. You will cause yourself and you will cause your house problems. You're even better off, rather than backfeed, if you run a big, heavy 25, 30 amp, 50 amp extension cord, you're better off doing that than backfeeding. The transfer switch is the best thing though. If you're going to run a generator, safety first. You really want to ground them. Just stick a 4-foot ground rod into the ground and connect up. There'll be a ground clamp of some sort on the generator. Because if any wires get loose in there and the wires get loose and you touch the frame of the generator, you can get electrocuted. The grounding helps prevent that. No smoking or flames near the generator. It's gas. No smoking or flames. Let the generator cool off a bit before refilling. If it gets real hot when you're pouring gasoline in the area of the generator, you can wind up with a fire. Generators do not like rain, snow, or other water. Don't go putting them in a puddle. If it's raining, get a tarp over them or something. And do not operate inside the house or the garage. They put out a lot of carbon monoxide. They're much worse than your car, for example. They put out a lot of carbon monoxide. You will get asphyxiated. 3 years ago, somebody up in the Hartford area decided to put a generator in his garage and then put a fan on to try to blow the exhaust out of the garage. And what he wound up with was his little fan, which was capable of moving, the air at about 5 miles an hour. And he was trying to use that to force the exhaust out into a 35 mile an hour wind that was blowing back into his garage. Didn't work. The entire family wound up in the hospital. Fortunately, nobody was killed, but there was some long-term damage to the children. So please don't operate generators inside your house or in the garage. Gasoline spoils. If you have a gas lawnmower, you know that. You can get fuel stabilizer. Try to use the gas that you have within about a year, even with the stabilizer. One of the things you can do is just cycle that gas through your lawnmower, snowblower, and your car. It's the same gas you use in your car. Try to run them monthly or weekly just to test them. And don't forget to change the oil. There are gas power generators that use natural gas or propane. Basically, the typical 20-pound tank that you use for your barbecue is equivalent to about a 2.5 gallon gas can. Propane stores better. The question is, what are you going to be able to get after a hurricane? Are you going to be able to get gasoline at the gas station? You're going to be able to get propane at the hardware store. Which one do you think is better? There are generators now that will do both propane and gasoline. They're pretty easy to switch out. You do need a pliers and maybe a screwdriver. You need to be able to use a plier or screwdriver, no joke. And there are even some that'll take natural gas and propane and gasoline. Again, you may need to use a plier or a screwdriver to switch out one or the other. But consider that if you're going to get yourself a generator. How do I know what's a good generator? Consumer reports, trade magazines, websites are not very useful these days. Consumer reports, the problem with consumer reports has always been that as soon as the manufacturers know that Consumer Reports is doing a study on something, they immediately discontinue all their existing models and come out with new models. This is not a joke. They really do that. So that way, if they get a bad rating, they can say, oh, we don't make that one anymore. So by the time a Consumer Reports evaluation hits the newsstands, none of the things they've reported on are available in the marketplace. And as far as trade magazines and websites, all of these people are advertising revenue. They're based on advertising revenue, and they're not going to say anything bad about a product. They'll just forget to mention the bad things about the product. So you look at one product and they'll mention various good things about that product, and you look at the next product and they don't happen to mention those particular features. And, you know, how do you know whether it's good or bad? I've had some pretty good luck with the reviews on sites like Amazon and Home Depot and places where customers write reviews. Now, understand the good reviews are basically worthless. Half of them are written by the advertisers, or written by the manufacturers, or written by Amazon, or written by Home Depot. They mean nothing. And the other half are useless. Like you look at the reviews and it'll say, and the review will say, "Oh, this looks like a really good generator. I think I'll buy one." That's kind of a useless review. Look for the models with a lot of reviews and look at the bad reviews. Is it a lot? Is it a little? You know, 1% is pretty good. There's always going to be a 1% problem rate. If it's 5%, 10%, stay away from that thing. What kinds of problems are people reporting? You know, something important, like the thing broke, versus something annoying, like, well, I had trouble putting it together, or the wheel came off, or something like that. What are people reporting? If it is something important, how often are they reporting the same important thing? You know, how often did people say, "Hey, the crankshaft broke"? How often did people say, "This is supposed to connect up to the internet so I can operate it through my phone," and it wouldn't communicate? That's probably the best way that I know of right now to find out, to get some sort of a halfway decent idea what's going on with these products. And one thing I do want to cover, you've probably seen ads for these things. They advertise a lot on social media. They advertise a lot on late night television. These things that call themselves solar generators. Now, with a name like that, it sounds like it's taking power from the sun and converting it to electricity. They're not. It's just a big battery. There's no solar about it. Usually these things have names that sound like a well-known product. For example, if you look at this one that I'm showing, it's called a Generac. Generac is the people who make the big whole house generators. They're a very good, very reputable company. This is called Generac. You know, and there are other things like there was one company, you know, you've all heard of Black & Decker. They were Black & Docker. So these are basically just big batteries. What they do have is a bunch of add-ons that, so you can power up your cell phone, you can power an appliance, you can charge your phone, things like that. Very nice. But look at this thing, $1,500. That 1,000 watt-hour car battery is not that big a car battery. It'll cost you about $300 or $400. All the other doodads in here, if you know what you're doing, cost you another $200. You know, if you got somebody who works with cars, if you got a kid who's into you know, do it yourself, home repair, those kinds of things, you can put together the same kind of thing for about $500 instead of $1,500. Now, if you want to get this thing, fine. Just understand what it is. You're talking about something that can deliver some power, not a lot of power, for 4 or 8 hours, not a lot of power for 4 to 8 hours. And then if you have to recharge it with a solar panel, you're taking up a full day the next day. So I spent $1,500, and at best, I'm going to be able to use this thing on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday because it's going to be charging on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Just be careful. It's just a big rechargeable battery. So I just wanted to mention those because they annoy me. I think that's it. Brittany, any questions?
Thank you, John. We got one question. which was how far inland can the water levels historically reach in Glenbrook area? And Chief Roach already answered that. He said it depends whether we are talking coastal or river flooding. Coastal flooding is not a real issue in Glenbrook, but as we experienced during Ida, local flooding can be very bad throughout the city. We have not received any other questions. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a big thank you to our panelists and our presenter. To stay connected with the city emergency alerts, please sign up on our website. We also post important information on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And please pay attention to weather alerts and contact us with any questions. Thank you everybody for joining today, and take care, stay safe.